Hey everybody, welcome. Hey everybody, welcome to. Hey, I'm gonna do this one more time. Hey everybody, welcome to the selection committee on SB Nation. My name is Dan. As always, joined by Spencer Hall, Bill Connolly, Bud Elliott, and Jason Kirk. And together we form. We really should have like some decoder rings or something. But we are the SB Nation selection committee, and yeah, you probably see all sorts of outlets doing this across the country, coming up with their four teams. We were doing it last year, suckers. So kind of the OGs, no big deal. But we're going to figure out who the best four teams in the country are according to ourselves. And I have my thing like this because I like looking like a coach sometimes. So we're going to figure out our best four teams. Because Jason was the first one on this call and was so diligently on time, Jason, who are your top four teams right now?
I'm going to start with Mississippi State, which still has yet to truly look week in and week out like a number one team, but I think they've met that number one-ish team mark more frequently than anybody else has to this point. You really can't compare beating Auburn by 15 points to really anything FSU's done. So, and if those are the top two teams in the running for that top spot, then it's got to go to Mississippi State. I think FSU's closing that gap quite a bit. Gave a good Louisville team a head start, and then still more than doubled up the spread. So, FSU, if we're waiting on them to look like what we think a number one team should look like, I think they did that against Louisville, even despite the amazing advantage they gave the Cardinals to start that game off. Still behind Mississippi State in the computers. I don't think you can count a win, a close win against Notre Dame still don't think you can count that as anything all that special. Notre Dame looked pretty bad against Navy. Everybody kind of looks bad against Navy, but Notre Dame hasn't really looked much better than that at any other point in the season. So to me, that's just a decent win over a ranked team, but still number two. Number three, I've got Auburn. Winning at Ole Miss, at Kansas State, and blowing out LSU, and ranking number one in most of the computer ratings. That's a solid number three right there, especially when your only loss is to the either one or two team, depending on how you're calling it. And number four, I've got Oregon over TCU. I think they've looked more consistent teams, but I think if you really break down the week in, week out schedule, I think it's pretty comparable. And TCU, their three big games, they've all been coin flips. They could just as easily be 0-3 against Oklahoma, Baylor, and West Virginia, or 3-0. But to me, TCU is a 5, not a 4 at this point. Oregon's got the win over Michigan State is probably bigger than any of those three, and also just far more dominant. There's no real way Michigan State could have won that game in the final 10 minutes, which you can't really say for any of TCU's big wins. But still, TCU, if they get past Kansas State, we got to find room for them. So that's my 4 right now.
This is true. Bud, when you look at Florida State's win against Louisville on Thursday night, are you coming away from that win feeling more confident in Florida State's ability as a top 1 or 2 team because they did come back and looked so good on offense in the second half, or do you look at that as a whole as being disappointing because of that first half and the mistakes they made, and what is your top 4?
I mean, I think you have to consider both halves. They did get down like that. They did struggle to make some adjustments early. They were without 7 of their 9 scholarship linebackers, which kind of complicated things for much of the first half until Eddie Goldman decided he was just going to go beast mode on their center and kind of solve the linebacker problem via defensive tackle. And then the offense really hummed in the second half. Dalvin Cook hit some big runs. I think that I'm probably going to put Mississippi State number 1 right now, just because they did get up 48-17 on Auburn, which is a pretty good Auburn team.
Yep.
That final score was not as close as that game indicated. That thing was over pretty quickly there. And they also have the impressive win at LSU, which is an improving LSU team. Florida State number 2 for me. Probably a little bit closer this week, certainly, because, look, Arkansas is not any good. They lost to a bad Texas A&M team. They have no quality wins at all. Texas Tech is terrible. That's their win. We can't be giving people credit for narrowly beating Arkansas. It's just they're not any good. So, Mississippi State kind of closed the gap a little bit there this weekend with FSU. Number 3 for me, I think, is Oregon. And then number 4, after what they did this weekend on the road at West Virginia.
All right, Spencer, who are your top 4 teams, and what is your opinion of those 4 teams in terms of this past weekend Did they strengthen your thoughts? Did they weaken your thoughts as deserving to go to LA, New Orleans, or Dallas?
Well, I still have Florida State number 1 because I don't think anybody's talking about the Noles enough. What an overwhelming and perfect team they are.
True.
It didn't change anything because they're still the same uneven team they were going into this game. They just keep increasing the margins and keep increasing the amount of luck and the amount of skill from Jameis Winston and the receivers to bail it out, because that's what they do. They get down, they start throwing the ball all over the place, which they can do because they happen to have the best quarterback in the nation in the form of Jameis Winston. So you really can't take them off until they lose. My number 2 is Auburn. Probably because they are the hairiest team to face in a one-game situation right now.
Yep.
If we were playing it, because if you get the ball back with a minute, they'll score, and if they get the ball back with 4 minutes, they'll score twice, and they're capable of making anyone look bad. And if you want to see a team that's going to look bad against them, Georgia, a team completely bereft of perimeter blocking, which Gus Malzahn might have noticed in watching them against Florida. So that's one game they won't lose. The opposite of losing, winning twice in that game, running for 700 yards. That's what they're going to do. The third team I have is Mississippi State because, yeah, it's Arkansas. Lovable losers, Arkansas. But Dak Prescott had one of his worst games of the year. Not an overwhelming performance. They're still in, but, put them down at 3. And then number 4, I have Oregon because Oregon really bullied Stanford.
They did.
Scores lots of line, which was a shocking thing. I think Stanford is at a different level performance-wise than they've been in years, and not a good one. That was a subpar performance all around, and a team that really could be pushed around by an increasingly healthy Duck line. So there's my top 4. Nothing really changed except maybe my opinion of Oregon went up a little bit because they really did manhandle that Stanford team. So that's new.
This is completely true. Bill, how strongly do you feel about your top 4? Where are the question marks? And do you feel as strongly, because obviously some of your formulas and some of your efficiency metrics really don't like Florida State at this point just because of their struggles on both sides of the ball? Of note recently, where's your top 4? Is Florida State in it?
Well, they have to be in it. They're undefeated.
True.
If I'm a committee member, I obviously have Mississippi State 1 and Florida State 2, like Jason did. If I'm picking teams in order of who I think would win a playoff, I have Auburn 1 and Oregon 2. So I guess that means they have to be 3-4. And I would pick them to win both of the games against undefeated teams. I don't know if I'd pick Oregon to beat Florida State, but I'd pick Auburn to beat Florida State and Oregon to beat Mississippi State. So it is an interesting situation right now where you've got 2 undefeated teams that are loose with the football, that give you extra opportunities to beat them and then beat you anyway. That's
right.
Really not a good thing to be when you're playing other really, really good teams in a semifinal and or a final.
To clarify, does that mean Florida State and Mississippi State are 2 of your 4 teams that you feel like could win a playoff?
I mean, they certainly could. They just wouldn't be my top 2 picks for sure. And I mean, if Alabama makes it, I might put Alabama over the 2 of them too.
All right, Jason, who is right outside of your top 4, and how likely is that team in your mind with their November or 5, 6, 7 to get into that top 4?
TCU is next up for me, and like I said, if they beat Kansas State, I don't care if it's another little 1-point win, like they've done throughout their Big 12 games, then you got to find room for them. I don't know who bumps out, but TCU is right on the verge, and Alabama's got several of its big games still to go. And it's, if Bama splits, if they beat Mississippi State, if they beat Auburn, they're in there. So those would be the next 2 in. Michigan State's got to be around 7th or 8th or so. That'd be the next group.
All right. Bud, we obviously, none of us had Alabama. I don't have Alabama in my top 4. I think we're pretty unanimous in our top 4 with Auburn, Oregon, Mississippi State, Florida State. Is Alabama, even though their resume does say they are, do you think they're one of the 4 best teams in the country, one of the 4 teams that is most likely to win the playoff if they were to get in?
I think there's a real chance they could be. I mean, they've clearly recruited really well at pretty much all their positions. Blake Sims has had some big time numbers against some, really lackluster defenses, and then he's also had, not a very good game at all against Ole Miss. So, what's the real Blake Sims here at this point? Do you believe that guy can take them, to the national championship and win it? I think, given Nick Saban's track record, probably. He's never really depended on great quarterback play. They could be the best team in the country. Auburn could be the best team in the country. I think, really, you could make an argument for, 6 or 7 teams right now, and that probably speaks more to anything about there's really no one great dominant team this year. Everybody has pretty clear flaws, and another weekend goes by, and it just kind of cements that a little bit more.
Spencer, are you positive that any of this is not meant to be negative for no reason, but are you more sure of a team that's in the conversation being a step below the rest of the team? So when I say the have the poll in front of me here: Mississippi State, Auburn, Alabama, Florida State, Oregon, TCU, and then Ole Miss, Michigan State, Kansas State is probably where I think a lot of people cut off in that first tier in college football. Is there a team that you are positive like that team does not belong in the conversation?
I'm one loss away from saying that about Florida State.
Really?
And that's just because they've been in the hole and because their schedule's so weak. I'm also this close to saying that about Kansas State because I always see Kansas State as an act of management, right? I always see Kansas State as this thing which is managed into excellence that doesn't have many particularly excellent parts.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kansas State fans, yes, you are by record in this conversation. You are. And then you watch Kansas State play and you go, I have no idea how. They don't do anything tricky. They don't do anything amazing. They're a little crafty on offense, and they just keep winning. And they could still be in this conversation at the end. But frankly, it's going to be a lot easier, and not fair, mind you, it's going to be a lot easier to take Kansas State out of this discussion than it would be to take TCU. Because you watch TCU play and go, oh, that's really an explosive, flashy team. If the one-loss team coming out of the Big 12 without a championship game is Kansas State, that's a hard sell. Fair or not, it's a hard sell.
Bill, who is your team that's outside of the conversation at this point but has shown at least flashes of being able to compete at the highest level and could beat a team in the conversation?
Well, Alabama at its highest level, I think, is still as high as.
Well, they're in the conversation. I'm saying outside of those top 8 or 9 teams.
Oh, so LSU is getting there.
Yeah.
Our disaster scenario is rolling right along, and I still think. I think Baylor's got a lot of potential. If they win at Norman, they'll be back in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say about Kansas State, if they somehow manage to win at TCU and at I think Baylor, and maybe at somebody else too, in this coming month, they'll have earned their spot. I think, no matter how. Iffy they look in the numbers or the eyeballs, really. If they keep winning, they'll have to be considered there. But I think we pretty much know at this point who the best teams are. I don't think there's going to be any surprise over here over the last month. There's not going to be an Auburn coming from the 20s in the rankings and catching fire over the last month. So it's just a question of who can manage, who can just grind out wins here. I'm not really sold on Mississippi State at this point either. They really do get pretty careless with the ball sometimes. But if they win out Alabama and Ole Miss, why does my opinion matter at that point?
This is true. Bill, follow-up question, just because we're snaking around here. This weekend, there are a number of interesting games. Oregon's on the road at Utah, TCU hosting Kansas State, Michigan State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, ASU. I'm forgetting one huge game, and now I forget it. What's the 5th game I'm missing that I did on Easy Call earlier today? In any case, LSU, Bama. That would be a big one. Which of those teams involved in those games that are involved in conversation are you most confident in being more sold on after this weekend?
I think probably Alabama will beat LSU, and that'll kind of solidify their situation a little bit. Of those games, I'm most curious. I've been a jerk in mentioning Ohio State and how they might crash the party here over the last couple of weeks.
Right.
If they win at East Lansing, they're right there in the top 6 or 8 at worst, I think. So those are the most interesting games to me. I do think Alabama is. I'm kind of convinced that they're about ready to roll here.
All right. No pun intended. I hope. Bud, to you, will you be most confident in being sold on after this weekend when you look at matchups, when you look at the possibility for solidifying dominance in the eyes of college football viewers?
I think you. like with that, there's no more road games for the Tide. I mean, it's Auburn at home and Mississippi State at home, and those are not going to be easy tasks. But they've been dominant at home this year. I mean, really, really good in Tuscaloosa. On the road, a little bit shakier. So if they can get past that, an LSU team that still really can't throw the football at all, but is beginning to run the football very well, playing better defense, that could be interesting. I think it's probably Alabama because would that be their best win on the year if they get it? So far they really don't have many great wins.
I mean, I guess it is. West Virginia was on a neutral field. Texas A&M looks worse and worse. Arkansas was not a good win when you look at the actual game. It's a pretty solid case. Jason, who do you feel most confident in playing well this weekend and establishing themselves as worthy, and who do you think really has a very good chance of stepping back and sort of being exposed for perhaps not being top 6, 7 worthy?
Yeah, I'd agree with everybody else on the first part, Alabama, and then like I keep saying, TCU or Kansas State. One of those should probably be in the top 5 after this week. And then, like Bill says, Ohio State, a team that should not be in the top 15 at this point, and they're not, based on that one horrific loss that Ohio State fans are so tired of hearing about. That continues to get worse by the week, but Ohio State itself continues to get better by the week. So if we're talking about a team outside the top 10 or so that I would least want to play against, it's Ohio State. And I don't really even know who would be second there. Ohio State looks like one of the best teams in the country at this point, even though their resume does not.
Fair enough. Spencer, Ole Miss. I don't think we've said them once. They were in the top 4 last week. They lose Laquan Treadwell. They lose this past weekend to Auburn. Are they, in your eyes, and they don't win games necessarily because of throwing the ball for 450 yards and having a huge offense. They don't run the ball particularly well. They just sort of put up enough points to beat teams with their defense.
They're one of those things where you're like, what do they do well offensively? And you say accidents.
Yeah, so Treadwell's gone. Are they done in your eyes with a defense that has been that good at times this season?
I think so. Treadwell's the difference maker. He's the person who could get a first down if you needed it. Mm-hmm. He's the person who really was able to, stretch at least half the field by himself. And he's not there. And I think that's just a margin they couldn't afford to cut based on the way they play and based on the offense they run. So I think they're done. I think the greatest potential they have at this point is probably a familiar spot for them by role, but not in locale and in specificity, meaning they can play spoiler in the Iron Bowl or in the Egg Bowl against Mississippi State, which is usually not. Ole Miss has usually been the spoiler for people, but not for Mississippi State because State just historically hasn't had anything to spoil, right? Like this is unprecedented territory for them. So to say that they couldn't do that at home in Oxford, I wouldn't make that call. It just seems unlikely at this point because Treadwell was so important to them on offense. And by the way, this means you rely more on Bo Wallace, which is a dangerous and tantalizing proposition.
Ooh.
Yeah.
This is true. Jason, is there a conference beyond the SEC? I know a lot of conversation have centered around like should the SEC get 3 teams into the playoffs, which is, but. Is there another conference outside of the SEC with 2 teams that you feel like have the potential to house 2 of the best 4 teams in the country?
2 of the best, sure, but 2 of the 4 that would be in the playoff, no.
Why is that?
Well, just because I think to be a second team from a conference that already has a team there, you've got to do something like Mississippi State wins the SEC and Auburn finishes 11-1 with a win on the road at Kansas State. That's the kind of resume you have to steal a second bid for one conference. But as far as having 2 of the best 4 teams in the country, sure, the Big 12 might have 2 of the best 4. We'll have to wait and see. I think at this point they probably only have 1 or so, but that's a hard thing to do. If anybody has 2 of the 4 best, it's the SEC. I don't think they will get 2 in there, but the Big 12 might. The Big 10 might. Ohio State and Michigan State, maybe at the end of the year we look up and say, hey, those are 2 of the 4 best teams. But to this point, I would say no.
Yeah, especially with the Pac-12 North looking as disappointing as it does. It could have had a situation with a great Stanford-Oregon game and both of those teams being undefeated until they play each other. That's not the situation, and now you'll have probably Arizona State and Oregon playing, and you're probably not going to want a two-loss Oregon team and probably not a two-loss Arizona State team in there,
Yeah,
if
and
that's
if we're
the
talking
case.
about Arizona State, they gave up 62 points at one point, so
They,
the Pac.
Can you hear me? Is our internet connection all right?
Yeah, it's skipping out a little bit here.
Oh, skipping out a little bit. Okay. Bud, to you, who are the four most talented teams in the country right now in terms of the highest level of pure talent that could be on the field in early January? Who are those teams?
Whew. I think you got to say Bama number 1.
Okay.
Probably Auburn 2. 3, probably Florida State if they can get some guys healthy. We'll see on that. And then 4, I think because quarterback play does matter so much, and there's not a lot of great quarterback play around the country this year, it doesn't look like, probably Oregon at this point. You know, the running backs look great. You know, Mariota's really fantastic quarterback, so that could be it. You know, LSU has a bunch of talent everywhere, but they really just can't throw, and that's fairly important. You know, I think that's the case with a lot of SEC teams, and you know, a lot of teams elsewhere as well. But specifically there, you know, they're so good at almost every single spot on the field, with the exception of quarterback.
Fair enough. Bill, is there a team or group of teams that the numbers, I know we talked about Florida State a little bit, that the numbers really like that polls aren't representing in a similar way? And is there a team that numbers particularly don't like but remain in the conversation?
Well, Ole Miss remains the top 4 team in our ratings, at least, and it makes sense why. I mean, who have they lost to? They lost to number 9 on the road, and they lost to now what is now number 1, losing 2 fumbles at the goal line. So, I mean, they still. I'd like to paint some scenario where they end up 10-2 and win the SEC and get in, because I feel really bad for them right now. But I mean, that's probably not going to happen. One team that, I mean, I think in terms of what the numbers would see as a really interesting game that we might overlook, Miami-Florida State is looking pretty interesting right now. I'm going to assume Florida State wins. I'm going to assume that Miami doesn't exactly have much of a home field advantage there. But Miami's 12th in the F+ rankings right now. They're the team that kind of stands out as they're the what the team of November right now in terms of the record not matching the rating. They've had some tough luck. They've lost at least 1 or 2 close games, and they've really improved over the last few weeks. So I think if Florida State's offense doesn't get healthy and doesn't get relatively stabilized, Miami's going to score a lot of points, and that could make that game interesting, especially if Winston wants to donate 2 or 3 interceptions in the first half again.
Fair enough. Spencer, I'm going to ask you about another team that appears to be at least a little bit less out of it. They're a 2-loss team, but a team that you wrote about in sort of awe about what they've accomplished over the years. Oklahoma. Oklahoma is just at this point in a Big 12 that's largely going to beat itself, and much in the way that many conferences are going to. Their composite ranking right now to beat good teams still. Is there any belief lingering in your mind that Oklahoma can not just play spoiler, but sneak into something?
I think they would have a better chance to sneak in if November included a decent Oklahoma State team.
Yeah.
And if Texas Tech and Kansas weren't both flatlining. And the Baylor game is really their chance. After this, it's all pretty much just obligatory wins. So this weekend is huge for them. They've got to pummel Baylor, which I think they can do for a lot of reasons. Primarily because of everything Baylor's been through injury-wise, and also just because of a couple of matchups on the field. So this is really the whole season for Oklahoma, which they know. You know,
yes.
If Bob Stoops has been on a Stoops scale, even pretty testy, pretty feisty this week already in terms of quotes and press conferences post game and on Monday. So he's got the T levels up. He's going to be good and ready for this, because after this they don't have a chance to prove a point with anyone. And that's that surprises me, because the Big 12 typically we've gotten every other year the Big 12 having this sort of cataclysmic November where they get to have like big matchup after big matchup, and a couple of teams going down has really kind of cut down on the drama there.
This is true. All right, Spencer, as the senior member of our committee, I'm going to allow you to choose one member of our committee to receive a completely random and personal question to conclude this broadcast.
Oh, that's good. Well,
it can be yours. It can be you, but you can also select somebody else.
No, I'm going to select Bill Connolly.
All right, Bill Connolly. What is your favorite Halloween costume that you ever donned, and what is your most memorable personal Halloween memory?
In 2002, I dressed up as Anna Nicole.
I chose well.
It was my favorite because it was so bad that none of my friends could look me in the eye for at least a week afterwards.
Why?
So,
what did it look like? How did you approximate Anna Nicole?
I mean, cantaloupes were in play. I don't remember who I borrowed the dress from. It might have been some sort of Goodwill thing. For instance, a drink umbrella in one of them at one point. But no, that one was so good that it embarrassed everybody around me. And so I consider that I mean, if you're going to go all out for Halloween, you might as well embarrass others too.
So where did you go dressed as Anna Nicole?
We had it was like a house party. So I didn't actually have to go anywhere. They came to our house to look at me dressed as Anna Nicole.
And then they left.
College?
This was absolutely college, yes.
All right. How was the night as Anna Nicole?
I mean, about as successful as it could be. It gets your back starts hurting after a while, which I guess means I did it right. But it wasn't. Sure. Everybody had a good time.
Great. Okay. That was a fantastic answer. Bill Connolly, Bud Elliott, Jason Kirk, Spencer Hall, for your time. Follow all of them on Twitter. Follow all of our work on SBNation.com. We do this every Monday. So we will see you next week.
R.I.P. Anna